Cutting ceremony. It is a state-of-the-art learning space for our students, and we thank the community for their support in bringing this vision to life. Can I have a motion to open the public meeting again? Bill, second. Heather, all in favor? Thank you. Let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag's over here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Tonight's meeting is a work session for the Board of Education. It is an opportunity for trustees to work closely with the administration. Tonight, we will hear presentations on 3 topics: capital referendums, update on Bond 2019, and district comparison data on grades 3 through 8 state exams and Regents exam results. We will also be transitioning to a regular meeting and taking actions on personnel, business, and policy matters. We will now continue with our first audience to visitors. I don't think we have any visitors, though. We have 2, but this is the first one. I don't think I need to read the whole thing because we don't have visitors. Okay. We'll now move to, don't we have the presentations first? Got it. Okay. Oh, that's what let's get started meant. Sorry. Okay. Got ya. Thanks. Okay. So we'll do the presentations first. Thank you. We're ready. Yeah.
Discuss the referendum and the use of the 2015 capital reserve. Do you want to tap, Christine? Or no? Okay, Christine, why don't you, while they're doing that, why don't you just start to speak to it?
Sure. Tonight, we're going to do 2 brief presentations to the board on what would end up being propositions.
I think you need a microphone for the recording, please.
Taylor Swift. Oh, like I'm Taylor Swift. Is he on? Yeah, there we go. All right, so tonight we're going to actually do two brief presentations on use of one of our capital reserves for capital work in the district, and then another presentation on establishing a new capital reserve. Both of those items would be referendums 2 and 3 when we go to vote on May 21st at the polls. The first referendum, hold on, Joe's here, so we're ready. Could you do the other presentation first, Joe? Yes, please, I'm sorry. Okay. Just go back to slide 1, please. Okay. So the first item we're speaking about tonight would end up being proposition number 3 on the ballot. Just for everyone's sake at the board, proposition 1 would be our budget vote. Proposition 2 is the election of board trustee members for the open seats on the Board of Education. And this is the recommendation or the proposal for proposition number 3. It would be a referendum to use Capital Reserve 2015. We have a capital reserve on the books. It has approximately $5 million in it, and there's been conversations in district on moving forward, maybe with projects and using Capital Reserve 2015. So that's the current balance as of our last audit report. So as of June 30th, it's $4,984,446. And since that time, the reserve continues to earn interest, so there's more money in that reserve as of now. And the monies can only be used for capital project work. So when money's in a capital reserve, after it's in the reserve, then you have to get the approval of the public before you can use that money on any projects in the district. So this is the phase where you would, if you want to move forward with this work, we would then include it and you would get the approval of the public in using this money. As we say, the use of the money requires public approval. So the recommendation or the conversations on use of this money involved two main projects. The first one is district-wide instructional space air conditioning. That estimated cost for that work is $3,820,000. The majority of that cost is the cost to bring electricity to buildings and increase the electrical capacity at all of our buildings. And that involves window air conditioning units, just so that we're all aware of what type of units would be air conditioning our instructional space. And this does not include air conditioning of large spaces in the district. So would not include air conditioning of our gyms if they're not already if some areas already have that, but it would include instructional classroom space. We've identified 110 spaces across all 4 buildings that would need to be air conditioned. And the other item for consideration that have been spoke about is a traffic signal at the Lawrence Hill entrance and exit of the junior-senior high school. The estimated cost of the traffic signal, after we completed the traffic signal report and then went out for estimated costs, this includes soft costs, $623,500. That would be a total use of the 2015 capital reserve of $4,443,500. So it really seems counterintuitive the way the state process is. Basically, the referendum asks the public to approve a total amount if you were to go forward with these 2 projects. And only after that approval do we then move forward with bidding those jobs out and ensuring that that is a not to exceed amount. So if we got approval from the public and we move forward, we cannot spend more than $4,443,500. We would have to make adjustments if for some reason the cost came in higher than that. So, and this is what happens if we decide to move forward with these projects. We would include the language for proposition number 3, in our legal notice for our budget that would be approved next month by the Board of Education. We would include language that proposition number 3 would be the use of the 2015 capital reserve for the following projects, and it would list it in detail. We would approve that at the February 13th board meeting. Has to be advertised, okay? Has to be advertised 4 times over 7 weeks as prescribed by law. It starts on a certain date, ends by a certain date. You have to advertise 4 times over 7 weeks. And then our community would vote on May 21st. And they would actually be voting on 4 separate items when they come to the polls. If we do 4, we're going to talk after this about another proposition, but they'd be voting on 4 separate propositions. So if this proposition passed, then the air conditioning and traffic signal projects would commence. And that's the process.
Okay, Christine, I just want, is this on? Yeah. The Board of Education last spring and into really September asked just for some feedback with regard to air conditioning, what the cost may be. There were some previous discussions with prior boards in terms of rooftop units, and I'll ask Mr. Grillo to speak to a little bit of the expenses regarding that, but it was over $20 million to do, that type of air conditioning. So this would address the classroom issues. We have, obviously that we do host some classes in the summer. The buildings are warm. There is construction and cleaning and all kinds of things that happens in the summertime. But really, we've identified 4 to 6 weeks of when those air conditioners would be used in the instructional spaces at that time. Now, could it be 8 weeks? Do some people keep their air conditioners on at different times? Yes. Currently, right now, the air conditioners that are in classrooms are typically for identified students who have medical needs or staff members who have medical needs. Now, keep in mind, we do have air conditioners in some spaces that it's just too cumbersome to take them out. So there are classrooms that, while there's no students with medical needs, we haven't taken the units out. They're old units. They're in the window spaces. So it would be a lot of work, and I'm not saying that the teacher doesn't turn them on in those spaces. So there is some inequity in terms of where they are. In September, when it was pretty warm, when we returned to school, we did buy some floor units, and those are vented through the windows, like the lower windows. Again, they're not the most cost efficient, but they certainly can do the job in a pinch for those classes that we monitored the temperatures that got increasingly warmer than other spaces. So we did purchase some of those units to just address that in the first couple of weeks of September last year.
I just want to make sure, like, testing spaces, are those all in classrooms? We don't use any of the big, like the cafeterias or the gyms, like, for, when we have ACTs here, or...
Those are not included in all of this configuration. So
Right, so I want to make sure, like, when at the end of the year, when it's warm and kids come to take the ACTs, are they in classrooms, or are they in...
Currently, right now, are you saying,
Or is that how it could be set up to make sure that when kids come to take those tests, they're into air
right, obviously in those spaces, yeah. But I'm just saying, just in cafeterias and locations that are larger, we do not necessarily have air conditioning in all of those larger spaces district-wide.
And one of the trustees asked a question about, kind of what is the $3.8 million for the air conditioning comprised of? If you actually see, both Lloyd Harbor and the junior senior high school are at electrical capacity. So this is their cost just to bring electric to those buildings.
Christine, we can't see those numbers from here, so if you could just speak to them.
Sure. So in Lloyd Harbor, the incoming electrical service to the building is $708,000 just for Lloyd Harbor. Currently, Lloyd Harbor can only handle 20 additional window units in the whole building. They need an electrical upgrade in general. They can only put in 20 window units without an electrical upgrade.
And how many would this give them?
This gives them everything that they need. So the
what number is that?
It's above. I'm not sure with we did the 110 units. I just don't have that number.
The breakdown by, we can get the board the
Yeah, we can get it for
information
you.
breakdown by building, what the,
I thought like the little theater had air conditioning now.
They do. Those spaces that already had air conditioning, we actually went through a schematic of every building, identified all the spaces that already have air conditioning, and then literally identified the spaces that didn't, and took out things like the gym, like we weren't going to air condition the
Right.
gym.
Can
No.
we have this sheet sent to us so we can read it?
Sure.
Because I can't see anything.
Of course.
Thanks, yeah.
Upgrade the electrical to do that, because I know like Goose Hill is getting,
Goose Hill and West Side have electrical capacity. They don't need an increase to their electrical capacity. It's the high school and Lloyd Harbor that need the increase.
So Christine, at the bottom in the yellow where it says totals,
Yep.
those aren't the number of
Those are the
units?
numbers. Thank you, Ted. Those are the
Okay.
numbers.
I
At
can't
Lloyd
see it from
Harbor,
here, yeah.
it's 20 window units that they need.
And it looks like you're including the gym in that.
We ended up taking it out at the end if it's not referenced on here, correct? Or is it being air conditioned with the bond 2019? Yeah, take it over. You know the detail better than me.
Thank you. So the way we set this up is your first line item is the cost to buy and install the window unit as well as the purchasing of the air conditioner itself. The second line item was where are we with overall capacity at each building in terms of your incoming electric service. The third item, there's still a couple of rooms. Every time we come into a school district, we always find here's a room that makes a good office really quick or in a pinch. There are a couple of rooms in each building that we want to improve the mechanical fresh air ventilation. Right now they have windows, but on a very cold day, wind-driven rain. You'll see that in the third presentation later that we're doing that as part of some of the other work. And then we're also, as part of this, we have to now add sub-panels. We're running all of these outlets throughout the building, but we don't have circuit breaker panels available for this. So what I did was and you'll see it in the third presentation, we are, as part of the bond issue, air conditioning large spaces in each building, but not every large space. When we were planning the bond in 2018, 2019, the board asked, what would it cost to blanketly air condition every single space in the district? When that number was astronomical, we went to 1 or 2 large spaces. So the high school already had the pack. Goose now has their cafeteria. West Side, we did that as one of the first projects in the bond. Their cafeteria is air conditioned. And at Lloyd this summer, we'll be doing the cafeteria and the little theater. So those 2 spaces will be air conditioned as well. If we decide that we're never, ever going to air condition any other big spaces, we could probably get away with holding off on the Lloyd Harbor electric service increase. But if we're going to air condition that, or there's talks about air conditioning, it makes sense to do it all at the same time. The high school, right now you have a 4,000 amp service. You can't, by code, have a electric service larger than 4,000. So we would have to bring in another 2,400 amp service if we wanted to air condition not only with the windows, the unventilated or the improved ventilated spaces, plus the gymnasium, the field house, the 2 cafeterias. So we're really at our limit at Lloyd and the high school, but we're definitely at our limit if we wanted to air condition in the future any of the other big spaces. But Goose is fine, and West Side is fine.
Got it.
Are all spaces under consideration being used in the summer?
Oh, no. No. Instructional spaces in the summertime? No, not at all. And no,
Goose
so.
Hill, though, some of it.
Yeah, so the high school has a handful of classrooms for our special education junior, senior high school students, and Goose Hill is where we house our summer reading program, and for about 6 weeks, and our primary or special education elementary program at Goose Hill. So we do use, I want to say, 4 to 6 classrooms at Goose Hill for those programs. And again, they're in currently we put them in the air-conditioned spaces. I would never have the kids instructionally in spaces, so we make sure they're in those locations.
I have a point of inquiry over here. So it says on the bottom, Lloyd Harbor, we can add an additional 20 classroom AC units without the need for new incoming service. But then at the bottom of Lloyd Harbor, it says that price is for 20 window units. So
Plus the gym.
So what I did, because I knew, because Anthony and I have walked the district 2 or 3 times, I know we missed a couple of rooms. So to each of the elementary schools, I added 4 more or 5 more air conditioners, and at the high school, I think I added just another 8. So we have that on hand.
How many are there now at Lloyd Harbor and West Side?
I actually have
make sure you're talking in the microphone. It doesn't pick you up.
I'm just curious because I know we added some last year. How many are at Lloyd Harbor? How many are at West Side? Like,
I
is it like
can-
half? You don't have to give me exact. Is
Anthony,
it
do you
like
have
half?
that data?
I'd like to know exact.
You would.
The ones that were added last year were the temporary ones, which we weren't counting in this.
You didn't
So
count.
just
You didn't count.
temporary ones were added last year? Okay.
So
I'm just repeating it. So
I'm
we have
sorry.
it.
So at Goose
people
Hill,
watching.
looks like there are 4 rooms or 5 rooms that have window units. A couple of the newer rooms that we created after we took over the library have some mini splits. At West Side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Looks like a dozen at West Side have window ACs. Lloyd appears to have 1, 2, 3,
Lloyd
4,
has the
5.
most. Lloyd Harbor has the most.
Yes, 18 or 19 or so. And I just can't add that high for the high school. But everything in yellow at the high school is a window air conditioner. I can get this in definitely more than a chicken scratch for you guys if you need it.
Yeah, Anthony, tomorrow, can you just send over the list and I'll share it with the Board of Education?
And so, John, it says here, right, the window units plus gym. So it could fit 20 more window units, but not the gym. So that
Correct.
bringing that electric up in Lloyd Harbor, then the $700,000 fee for bringing up the electric would really just be to add the gym. Is that right? You could add the other window units without bringing
Correct.
up the, okay.
The one thing we are seeing, though, is right now, we're about 18 to 20 months. We're still seeing crazy backlogs after COVID. We're about 20 months out for electric service to bring the electrical equipment from the utility company. So we do it now, we're not going to see it for 2 more years. So if we want to, even in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, maybe look to air condition other big spaces, it does make sense to do it now because it's going to take us a couple of years to get the electric service up to snuff.
What other big spaces at Lloyd Harbor wouldn't be covered at this
The
point?
gymnasium.
No, that would include the gym, I thought.
That would include, well, we're not air conditioning the gym as part of this proposal. If we wanted to air condition the gym, we would need the new incoming electric service at
So
$700,000.
how much more would it be to include the gym then in that? It
You would
seems like,
probably be the gym at, well, I can tell you the gym at the cafeteria at Goose Hill was almost $700,000, and Lloyd and West Side's gym are larger, and that's 18 months ago already. So
Okay.
let's say rounded up another $1
because
million
you can't
at
do
each of the
units
spaces.
there. It's full HVAC. Is that the story?
Yeah, something of that, that
Yeah.
larger space
Yeah.
and the ceiling height, the volume is just
okay.
too big to do multiple units.
Got it.
Just one more time, John, can you go over Lloyd Harbor, the large spaces that either are in bond 2019 or currently air conditioned?
To be air conditioned this summer, that's what we'll look at tonight, the cafeteria and the little theater. So then the only space that would be left at Lloyd would be the gymnasium, and then the same thing really at Goose Hill and West Side. The only spaces that would be un-air conditioned would be the gymnasiums at the 3 elementary schools.
And when we talk to instructional spaces, some of our instructional spaces are smaller for a resource room teacher or a reading teacher or an AIS type classroom. Those were not included, correct? Those tinier, we're talking just large classroom spaces, correct?
We're also air conditioning and ventilating as part of the 21-22 capital, which we'll look at tonight as well, other spaces in all 3 elementary schools that needed improved mechanical ventilation, and several of those small group instructions. The 4 small rooms in front of Lloyd that face the bus loop, a couple at Goose Hill, and then there's 2 at West Side.
All right, can you just highlight that when you're doing your
Sure.
presentation?
I'd also like to see, Christine, a different slide, if possible, that shows us all the units we could bring into each school without bringing up the electric, because that's the bulk of the cost here. And it looks like you could do, but I'd like to see the totals for that. I mean, I can do the math in my head, but I think it might be helpful for everyone to see the comparatives on that. I could just probably do it right now, back of the envelope also, but because it looks like you could do 14 more at the high school, 20 right at Lloyd Harbor, and does it say how many more you could do at?
You have enough at West and Goose.
You can do them all at Goose Hill and West Side. Just the high school and Lloyd Harbor, where we're spending $2.268 million to bring up the electrical. And 700 of that is just in case we want to do the gym in the future. Okay. Thank you, that's clear.
Would we need that electric for anything else other than the air conditioning
No.
in the future?
No,
that you
we're good. I
anticipate?
mean, we
Okay.
have, it's just if we're going to now go above and beyond. When the buildings were built, they didn't think of that, 50 years ago. We
Got
just
it.
didn't have the capacity. So, I mean, I think back to your point is if we're definitely not going to do the gyms, you could probably get away with not having to increase the electric service at Lloyd. Because remember, engineers are always 80%. So 80% of our total load gives us a 20. So we have a little wiggle room, but that's the electrical engineers' standards of 80% of your maximum capacity. So if we don't want to air condition the gym at Lloyd, then we're good there. But we can't even get more than a third of the window units at the high school without bringing in the new electrical service.
Got it.
How reliable is the cost estimate on the electrical upgrade if it's like 2 years out before we can get it done?
So this would be designed right away, submitted to the state. So this would probably be bid this time next year. So there is that escalation that is built into all of these for that.
And you're going to get us information on how many units are already, how many spaces are already air conditioned in the high school, right? And then what it would be with the addition of, sorry, I keep losing my place on this, 14 extra that we could do without bringing up the electric? Because I think a lot of, the most concern we heard from the community was really the littler ones. I mean, the high school students obviously are very, very important, but can manage drinking water and all
Sure.
of that too. So I'm just curious because that's a large number on the electric there.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I will take the key plans and not my chicken scratch highlighted, but I'll do them on a computer, and every room that's, let's say, has a red in it, that's already air conditioned, and then anything in white will not have and I'll do it out to the end of the summer of '24. So you see either what is done or what will be done in the next round of projects.
Yeah, and I think it would be useful to know from the principals too, you know, like Mr. Dambusky, the gym and the cafeterias in the warmer weather, can kids be outside or is it crucial? I mean, if it's crucial to have those air conditioned, I think that would be important for us to know too.
Dan, you got to come speak at the microphone if you're going to answer. The other thing is, if, you know, we're running tight at Lloyd, but we're not looking to improve the electrical, and there might be 1 or 2 more classrooms, we could do those smaller floor units without, you know, tapping into the electrical panel. So, and certainly, you know, those came in a pinch and did cool down the rooms.
So, respect to the cafeterias, the
Yeah.
junior high students, they pretty much eat real quick and then they're outside. Even on days like today, they eat real quick and they're outside. Anything above 30 degrees, they're going out. The senior high school kids, as you go through, obviously seniors have the ability to leave campus for lunch. Upperclassmen tend to kind of eat and then just linger and hang out in the cafeteria. Phys ed, for the most part, unless there's a heat advisory, they're going to go out as much as they can, as long as they can, before they're forced to bring students back in due to weather.
So in a heat advisory, is it worthwhile? I mean, this is, yeah.
So it's interesting because the heat advisory goes off the real field temperature. So if
Yeah.
you think about what the real field temperature might be outside,
Sure.
and then you bring the students into a gym, you might still be impacted by that heat advisory
Yeah.
because the actual space might be over the temperature that you can't have
Sure,
physical
it's
activity
hot.
outside.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
And then, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Dambusky, do you think it is worthwhile for us to look at trying to air condition the field house or the gym, based upon, you know, what you just said as far as gym class and also, you know, the activities that occur over the summer, like the Seahawks booster camp and the practices?
I will also remind that we hold graduation in the field house.
Yeah.
Yes.
that's
We
the
have
big
been very fortunate the last 2 years that the graduation ceremony has been on a day that has not been brutally hot and humid. I would venture to guess with 1,000 people in that field house on a day where it's 90 degrees and 90% humidity, it could get pretty brutal. You know, we do run athletic camps all summer long. I mean, you know, I can't speak as an engineer or an architect like Mr. Grillo does. The field house is a massive space, so I can only imagine how big you would need to have a unit to actually air condition that space. But some of the larger events like graduation, I mean, typically, if you've been in a graduation ceremony on a day like that, you know, the mortar board is bending on your cap, your gown is drenched in sweat. So, you know, do I see the benefit of it? Yes, I do. We also, I want to remind, during Regents exams, for the most part, our grade level exams, like a U.S. history exam, we're utilizing a gymnasium for our general education students to test in.
That's helpful to know.
right.
Because when we go into the actual number of classrooms between accommodation classrooms, I have to really look and see based on larger administrations where you might have or 2 exams running at the same time, which has not thankfully been an issue recently. But if we have a larger administration, we might just not have enough instructional spaces and or proctors to run individual classroom sites for every single test.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, I mean, my question isn't specific to the air conditioning, but just the whole concept. So if you want to go ahead, Heather, if you have something on the air conditioning.
Just because I can't see on the screen, how much does it cost to bring the electricity into the high school?
So that number is 1.5 million.
Okay, thanks.
So, Christine, it would be helpful if you could speak to, you know, this idea that we have 4.9 million in our last capital reserve fund. You know, and we spoke about this when we talked about using the other capital reserve fund for the CVA cases, how, okay, well, we have this 5 million sitting here for a rainy day. Why are you comfortable using 4.4 of that 4.9 million for these projects? You know, what would happen to our rainy day fund?
So as we know, we used our 2020 capital reserve in our funding plan for the CVA settlements. So we do know that, and that has passed, and we are ongoing with that plan and making those payments. That makes the 2015 capital reserve all that remains for the district. So the district only has $5 million in a capital reserve. This idea is really just born out of the ongoing conversation of these two items. Ultimately, will be the board's decision whether they want to move forward. But looking forward, we're also asking you in the very next presentation to establish another capital reserve. So that would be your fourth proposition to your voters. Establishing the reserve is not funding the reserve, just so everyone knows. Just because you establish it doesn't mean there's any money in it yet, because the first step is establishing. You actually have to establish before you can even fund. You can't do them concurrently by law. So it's always in any district's interest to have a reserve available, even if you don't have the funding earmarked yet. So then moving forward yet another step yet again, we're always looking at where we think we're going to end fiscally in any given year, this year, and future out years, because that's how we plan, long-range plan for the district. So we already know that we anticipate a surplus in operations at the end of this fiscal year. We do have an estimate. Estimates can change, but we believe that we're in the ballpark. So the board will have an opportunity at the end of this fiscal year, when we're closing the books, to make a decision where to put that surplus. One of the decisions you could make is to put it in any one of the reserves or the new reserve if the public votes favorably to establish the new 2024 capital reserve.
Okay.
Okay, and just to, you asked specifically, Tammy, about rainy day funds. Also not identified in the reserve balances that we have, the law allows us to have 4% fund balance, undesignated, you know, in a school district. That's the limit. We are at the limit, which is a good thing. You want to be at the limit. You want to have 4% available for a rainy day. For us, that's a little shy of $3 million, about $2.8 million. So we do have money sitting in the unassigned fund balance that in case of emergency, the board can declare something, a contingent expense that they didn't know about it, like if there was a roof problem or something happened, and they could appropriate those funds, increase the current year's budget, and take care of that emergency. But it only addresses it up to the limit that's in that 4% undesignated fund balance account.
Okay.
Did I answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
that's very helpful to hear. Thank you.
I have another question, just going back to the actual costs here. So forgive me because I don't know how electrical panels and ventilation work. So for Lloyd Harbor, if we go back to not needing to bring up the electric, then do you not also need to put in the new electric panels and the improved ventilation? Are those costs also a reduction then?
So the electric panels are directly tied into the outlets. Right now, once the electric comes into the building, then it's like in your home, you have a circuit breaker panel.
Right.
And then from there, it goes to an outlet. We're out of room in our circuit breaker panels in our buildings, so we're bringing in new electric panels.
Got it.
just to feed the
Just
electric
for
outlets.
those units.
Correct.
It has nothing to do with bringing up the new electric service?
Correct. Standalone.
And what about the ventilation cost?
The ventilation is just really improving ventilations in spaces that have natural ventilation, but they don't have mechanical ventilation.
Okay.
If I had to do anything, I'm picking this one over any of the other ones. I mean,
Okay. Does it improve the way the air conditioning units work too, or?
these are specific to individual rooms. At my bottom slide, so we need 3 rooms at the high school, 2 rooms at Goose Hill, 4 rooms at Westside, and 1 more room at Lloyd Harbor that needs a small little packaged rooftop unit for heating, cooling, and ventilation.
Okay, and they're not related then
Correct.
to the electric? Okay,
Correct.
thanks.
I tried to break this out so it's
I was
you
just
could
looking
pick and
to see
choose like
where
a
we could
menu.
save. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you.
ready to move on?
Yes. I think so. Is everyone else ready to move on?
Yep.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, so our next conversation about propositions, potential propositions for this budget, May 21st budget vote date, is a referendum to establish capital reserve number 5 is what it's technically called. And I think we refer to it here as the year it was established, the 2024 capital reserve. So as I already mentioned, that we do not have any capital reserves that have any funding capacity left in them. We had to, the public had to vote that there was no need for the 2020 capital reserve as part of our CVA settlement plan. So that has been liquidated in accordance with law and to make those payments. The 2015 capital reserve, if we move forward with air conditioning, traffic signal, or some combination thereof, we'll only have what's left from the 4.9 million based on whatever the board decides they want to spend for a plan for air conditioning, traffic signal, or other, which isn't a lot of money in a capital reserve. We now see how much money capital work actually costs. It's a lot of money. So this would establish a capital reserve. It does not fund a capital reserve. And that's the first step by law to even have a mechanism to put money into a capital reserve, is have your public say, we want to establish one. Enter, clicker. Okay.
Christine, sorry, just
Sure.
not to go backwards, but this first referendum was air conditioning and traffic signal. We actually didn't see anything on the traffic signal, though.
We sent home the,
Oh, no, just for the purposes of this meeting.
Oh, okay.
Do we need to have a does anyone feel like they need to have a conversation about that at this point? Because we're skipping ahead and we didn't
yeah, perfect. We can
have
have
a
that
moment
conversation.
to, right, this is a work session and we only talked about one of 2 items on that.
We sent
so
home the traffic study so everyone could see it, and this was the estimated cost between John and the engineering firm as
for
to
the
what it would
purpose
cost.
of this meeting, I'd like to give people a chance to have
Sure.
a conversation about it.
So let's go back to that.
Thank
Joe, can we
you.
go back to that? We'll just go back to that slide. That includes it. Yeah. So the estimated cost of the traffic signal is $623,500.
Okay.
That includes the construction, the soft costs. We term soft costs as our architect and engineering and, you know, our project management costs. And $623,500 is what that came in at. Do you guys,
John, can you just speak to the study, the traffic study a little bit, and bring the board? I know they have copies of everything, and I've gotten those copies, but can you just speak to it for the public purpose?
Sure. So did the board got the updated
Yes.
copy from? Okay. So after we had our last meeting with the board, Wayne had begun and his team had begun to do now the analysis. They basically set up an analysis and they count cars hour by hour by hour and then document that, and that warrants the need for the new traffic signals. Their decision was to provide 2 new traffic signals, 50-foot arms with 2 sets of light that would be coordinated. And then if you go through this is like mind-numbing to read. So let's get a good one. I'm just trying to find like a 7 to, so at 7 to 8 o'clock in the morning, if you look at any one of these things in the bottom corner, it lists the time, you know, the hour from 7 to 8 a.m. So leaving our campus, there are 140 people making a left onto Lawrence Hill and 152 people making a right onto Lawrence Hill. And at the same time, there's 273 cars going east to west, and 326 cars going west to east. And then they go through hour by hour, and you can see where it really dies down between, let's say, I don't know, 10 and 2, and then it picks up again. That's the data that they bring to the town of Huntington to go through with them to say, okay, it is justifiable that you do need traffic signals. It is warranted. The only thing the town doesn't do is they don't pay for them.
So this would be like a six-way traffic signal. You'd have the Lawrence Hill stopping and starting. You'd have the driveway of the high school and the Nature Conservatory stopping and starting. And then you'd have Seaward and the lab stopping and starting.
Yeah, there's 4 entrances or exits that come on to Lawrence. There would be 2. One would be on Seaward, and I think that's a nature conserve, and then Lawrence and the lab would be back. So there would be 2 50-foot arms, and they would be timed accordingly so we don't have, obviously, chaos. And that's way above any of our pay grades in here to figure all of that switching and that kind of stuff. That's what the town of Huntington will work in with Wayne Muller and his team to put that all together for us.
And sorry. I was, will that, I guess maybe this is a question for the town of Huntington. Will they be able, I think we had discussed during peak hours, keeping it, red, light, green, and during non-peak hours, having it blinking yellow or blinking red.
Yeah, after we had left that, and I had talked to Wayne about that I don't think we need, between arrival, departure, and maybe again after sports are leaving, so they'll work on that accordingly. And there's always tweaks. There's always be tweaks to that, even as they're both up and running.
Great, thank you.
Would this also include some sort of like a tripwire, like if you had an event or something where traffic started to build up when you normally wouldn't? Could the light go off at that point?
I could see about if they'll incorporate pressure pads, whether you actually see them, they cut them into Lawrence. We could see if we can do that coming out of our driveway. I can definitely ask about that.
Right, big sporting
Okay.
events.
Sure.
things like that,
Right,
the
right.
shows, yeah.
Homecoming.
Do they have an estimate of how much quicker an exit would be, let's say during the morning exit rush? Like right now, I know from personal experience, it takes like 10 to 15 minutes if it's full. Like what does that number drop to with a traffic light?
That's not in this document, but I will definitely ask Wayne to get that for us. Absolutely.
I mean, I'm assuming that would be dependent on how long the green light stays green coming out of the driveway. Right? Thank you.
They felt that for safety reasons, it was important to
Correct.
have. Yes, yeah.
Correct.
So more than for the volume of the traffic. Control more for the safety of the drivers, right?
I guess that's the determination of each individual. I mean, if
Right.
the safety is there, as well as, getting on and off campus, mostly off campus during the critical times, arrival and departure.
And just because I have to ask, is that, sorry to anyone on Seaward, but is that a private road with a homeowners association? Is that something where they would contribute possibly to a traffic signal? And what about the labs?
We could definitely look into that. That's a good idea.
Could they turn it down, any of them?
I don't think they can turn it down because it's on, they would have to,
I would think the labs might, I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of the labs, but we could talk to them certainly about whether or not they'd be willing to contribute something to
I'll talk to Wayne.
this
if-
community partnership.
Sure.
I certainly think it's worth asking, and, we have a number of students that attend from the lab. Our scientists' children attend our schools, so.
I think the question was, can anybody block this because they don't like it aesthetically, not payment?
No, that wasn't my question.
No, that was
my
Lisa's
question.
question.
Okay, yeah.
I would have to check. That would be more of a legal thing. I'll talk to Wayne and his team about that, as well as the town.
Yeah. So I just want to go back to your question. So you want to know the number of minutes of the reduction in the heavy traffic flow. Heather, you asked about the pressure pads during peak time. That's, I'm going to say,
During off-peak
time like that.
Yeah.
It's busy, even though it's not the typical time. Inquire about our partners in the community, such as the lab, about helping with spending, costs for the
Right, the
equipment.
management of traffic in the neighborhood and
Mhm.
safety of the community, yeah.
And then.
The reason why we have to pay for it is because it's on our private road. If it was on a public street, then the town would have to
Pick it up.
pick it up.
And then, Bill, you asked about, can anyone block the construction of this and say, I don't want this, correct?
Yes.
That's illegal. I will ask our legal counsel that
So
question.
Lawrence Hill is considered private road?
No, but
Public.
Seaward might be a private
I don't think it is, but
road. Or the labs, coming out of their driveways. I don't
No,
know.
I think it was explained at a prior meeting that the need is coming from our
From us,
private
yeah.
exit.
Okay.
And without us, there's no need to stop the traffic, so that's why we would need to pay for it.
Okay. Does everyone
Any
feel
more-
like they've?
Could
yeah,
I,
go ahead.
I wasn't at one of the prior work sessions on this. Were there no other viable alternatives other than a traffic light? Because I had heard things like traffic circles and other ideas, making the exit two-way to exit. So
Bill,
were
there
all the
were-
other
there-
ideas not,
I was just
Crossing
gonna
guards, I
say,
think we
there,
brought up the idea of crossing guards too.
yeah.
there were studies in the past that we got in a packet that explained, that were looked at previously, that explained the reasons why or the costs associated with, like, regrading the other entrance in. They were looked at and dismissed as not viable. And then at the last meeting, we discussed the possibility of putting a cul-de-sac in, and the viability of that didn't seem likely.
There were some discussions about
were some
widening
discussion.
the entrances. I'm going to ask, actually, if you don't mind, Mr. Grillo, to speak to that, because he would have been here during that time when
Thank you.
prior boards.
And we did ask
explored
about
this
traffic
topic.
circle also at the last meeting. I think it was that we'd have to get land from these other people too. Yeah.
That's correct on that one. It would go so far into the neighboring areas. We've been looking at the traffic signal since, I think, 2000 or 2001. We looked at, apparently, Turkey was two-way way back when. It was just too wide for buses, and during crazy snowy, icy days, buses would slide down the hill. We, at one point, looked to widening and having a longer switchback road, taking away the hill on the side, going further south, or further north on Turkey. That was not a real viable option. And we even looked at, as you're leaving the campus, if you were going to go to the right, you would keep going to the right. If you were going to the left, there would be another road, kind of like where the construction road is now, that's getting all the way to the fields, going through that parking lot and making a left down there as well. And I think the town wasn't in favor of that one either. That was back in 2014 and 15.
In one of the studies, it mentioned that if a traffic signal was put up, then they might need to put another traffic signal down by like Harbor Road, between Harbor Road and the driveway entrance, like near the trail. Saying like red light ahead or something. Does that cost include?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it'll be the
Includes
two
us paying
50-foot
for it.
masts with the lights, then a warning light on coming east and coming west on Lawrence that'll say warning, traffic light ahead. I'm more concerned coming west to east. It's a little bit more of a blind corner, but when you're coming east to west, it's pretty much a clear shot. But we're assuming the town is going to have us put two in, one going each way.
Bill,
Okay.
didn't you bring up a turning lane? Like,
Kate, can you just put your
Oh.
microphone closer?
okay, so if the town said no to having a separate exit, is that the way, like, we can't try again? Could we put another proposal in to try to have a turning lane?
We could. That would still require the town because now we're altering the exit from the building. So let's say our road is 50 feet wide. We need another lane. We need to make a larger opening, so we'd have to go back to the town for that as another option. Whatever we do on a school going out of their property, what we can do on our property is our business, but once we enter onto public land, then we need approval from the town or the county, depending on what road and who has jurisdiction.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are we okay to move on?
We're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. All right, so we're transitioning now. We're talking about the establishment of Capital Reserve 5, which will be known as 2020-24 Capital Reserve. Again, this would be proposition number 4 if we decided to move forward with using Capital Reserve 2015 for any of the traffic signal or air conditioning combinations. This would be Proposition 4. Proposition 4 would be to establish Capital Reserve 5. All it is establishing it. It sets the terms. The terms that we've used for other capital reserves in the past were a term of 15 years. That means you can fund and spend the money within 15 years. It would be a maximum funding limit. We're recommending 15 million, and identifies the source of funding. Basically, the source of funding says from surplus from your operations or any other legal sources of funding. So that would be, for example, if we do prevail in our litigation for CVA insurance claims, that would be surplus funds for the district. We would take that money in, it would fall to our surplus that year, and we would have to make a decision on where to put those funds at the end of that fiscal year. So it really falls in the surplus funding category. And the thing to note is any use of money in the establishment of this reserve, funding and use of money, well, funding does not require public votes. At the end of every fiscal year, if you want to fund this reserve with surpluses from our operations, you vote on that as a board. The board gets to make that decision, does not need a public vote. But the minute you want to spend the money on a project, just like we're discussing the traffic signal and the air conditioning for the 2015 capital reserve, well, going forward, after there's money in this reserve, you'd have to determine the projects and go to your public and bring it to the vote, bring it to a vote. It doesn't have to coincide with your budget vote, which is the 3rd Tuesday in May. It can be at another time, but you have to get the approval of your public to spend the money. So why? What's the benefit of a capital reserve? Benefits of a capital reserve are many, but probably the most distinguishable benefit is that it avoids future debt borrowing. Future debt borrowing means that money stays out of your budget. You don't have to build in principal and interest payments into the future. Remember, building extra costs into any budget is difficult because we have limited revenue sources, and we also operate under a tax cap. So anytime we add something to a budget, we have very limited revenues on the other side to support that. So when you save money in a capital reserve, you're basically saving those costs for the future, not incurring interest, and you're also not increasing your budget in the future when you spend those monies. We get to invest those monies. We earn interest on those money. We're in a very hyper interest earning mode right now, the world's in. So right now, any money we have in our capital reserves is earning a lot of interest. And we would enjoy whatever interest rates are out there at the current time, that money would continue to be invested and earn interest for the district. So the public saving money, avoiding future interest costs, avoiding future impacts to their budget, and earning money on the money that they save. And then last, well, I said, it ensures our future budgets are not impacted by the debt service costs. So what's the next steps? If the board decides to move forward, we would add language in the legal notice that would add this as a proposition that the public would vote on May 21st, and if they give a thumbs up, we've established the reserve. And as early as the closing of our books, June 30th, 2024, you can vote to fund some of that reserve if you'd like. Or you don't have to, but it's available if we had to. And that's it. I guess I don't have a question slide. So questions, everybody?
Can I ask if the board would be in favor of establishing this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, you'll formally vote on it, and we'll put in the legal notice next month when you adopt
So
the
we'll
legal
start
notice. But we'll put the wording.
pro-
Pros, there's not many cons.
Right.
Yeah.
Establish it.
No,
No.
just establish.
And if,
Easy to set up, hard
Yeah.
to fund.
Right.
Harder to spend.
right.
Hard to
And
spend.
as Mrs. Costa said, are the interest rates right now, so we are expecting some additional interest that was not anticipated due to the, numbers. So you will have a little bit of extra surplus that we did not anticipate. Again, you may need it for future budgets, so it's a determination that you start to talk about in June and July, and then ultimately vote on around August, where to place those funds.
Actually, you will make a determination up to amounts prior to June 30th. It's required for you to make a decision prior to the last day of the fiscal year. But then you vote on the actual funding after the fiscal
Right,
year.
they're
So, yes.
estimates.
So you vote on an up to amount, and then we finalize it after the year is over. All right, great. Thank you.
All right, so the next presentation is a Bond 2019 update, and we've asked Mr. Grillo to put together some information for you. As the board knows, we just walked through that really beautiful science space with 5 additional classrooms. Our students are already engaged in instruction in those spaces, and that's all, again, part of Bond 2019 due to the funding and the approval of our community. There are a number of projects. At the start of the school year, we moved into the STEAM space, and we were able to get that up and running, but we're going to talk about some of the other projects that are out there as well.
Okay. So on the 8th of January, we opened bids for the rest of the bond Phase 3 projects, as well as what we had touched on before, 21, 22 projects. We got them back in pretty quick time frame at the state, over a few weeks. That's why we packaged everything together. So this is a little bit on the long side. There were 4 packages that went out to bid, and we opened bids the same day. So I'll walk you through the scope, the cost, and where we are budget-wise on each one. So at Westside School, we're calling this 104. This round of projects is the cafeteria and the kitchen renovation. Although we pulled the air conditioning out in the winter of 20 into 21, we finished that part. The largest part of this project now is to take the classroom that shares the wall with the kitchen, knock it down, move it, put in a large walk-in refrigerator freezer in the kitchen. That'll allow us to free up space. Right now, there are a couple of reach-ins inside the cafeteria itself at Westside. We can pull those out, get rid of those, redo the ceiling, the lighting, the flooring, and the serving line in both spaces. And then there were 3 sets of 2 bathrooms that were still on the docket to be renovated as part of this. Right now, we're recommending work location 1, 3, and 4. This is work location 2. We're holding off on that because now as we're starting to get to the Phase 4 towards the end of our bond, we really have to be careful with the funds available. So I'm not recommending anything that would put us anywhere over budget. So awarding work location 1, 3, and 4, the total estimate was $927,000. The budget was the total cost was $927, budget was $958. So we have $30,000 that goes back into the pile, and then we're going to put work location 2, as you'll see in a couple slides in advance, back on the list of projects to be completed. Lloyd Harbor, the bulk of this work is that we had talked about before, air conditioning in the cafeteria, air conditioning the little theater, as well as replacing the asbestos plaster ceiling in the little theater, getting that out of there. What I should have done here, which I didn't, is I should have grouped these bathrooms together. There's actually 17 single-stall bathrooms and 2 multi-stall bathrooms that still have not been upgraded at Lloyd. I should have grouped them in groups of 3 or 4 so we could pick a little bit more. Right now, the bids came in at $1.1 million. Our budget was 1.3, so we're moving $212,000 into our to-be-spent fund, and then we'll meet again on this and figure out, prioritize the bathrooms. Like I said, there's 19 bathrooms, maybe on a priority basis when we get to the end of the road here.
All right, John, I'm going to just ask you to stop right there.
Sure.
Is there any questions before we go too far about Westside and Lloyd Harbor? Any of that work?
I was just curious, you may not know this, so I apologize. Like, when the bids came in, how did they compare to what we had originally budgeted when we estimated the bond?
So these are our original, this is our original bond number.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's going back to 2019.
But that original bond number included all 4 workspaces, and now that actual bid packet number only has 3.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. At the high school, part of the Performing Arts Center was the audio-visual improvements, lighting, theatrical lighting, all LED lights, replacing the carpet, putting in aisle lights down the rows, edge lighting along the edge of the stage, repainting and redoing some of the clouds, redoing the smart podium. This one was originally bid at $1.1 million. We had a budget of $825,000. I then went out to some contractors that are on cooperative type bids, and I met with a GC and an electrical contractor. Electrical contractor was available on the Southampton bid, and the GC was available off the Bay Shore Schools bid. The same amount of work, we were able to get it to $809,000. So we're actually $16,000 under budget by going with a different means of awarding bids or recommending bids to the school district.
When will that work be completed by?
So this is all scheduled for summer of '24.
Everything in the whole presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
What we're trying to do, maybe throughout the spring, try to do some work at night, some of the electrical runs, try to get ahead of everything.
Could you go back to that prior slide? One more. Just so the board understands that John's going to be recommending that you reject the bids for this project. That's what the recommendation is, a rejection of those bids that we opened, because they were $1.2 million. Through alternate sources, which we're allowed to buy off of, where that same work is coming in at $809,000 from Bay Shore and
Southampton.
Southampton.
But that work is still going to move forward and get done this summer as planned, but just using another method of bid award.
Gotcha.
John, I just want to go back to West Side and Lloyd. So you mentioned 19 bathrooms at Lloyd Harbor. All of those 19 bathrooms, right, are not included in that number, right?
Correct. And there's 2 at Westside.
Again, that is a rejection of the bathroom bid.
That work location, correct.
Right, so when you see it on the agenda later, you're rejecting the items that, for the
You're
PAC,
putting on hold.
the Lloyd, and yet you're formally rejecting the bids that we opened on January 9th.
So this was part of the 21-22. That was, I guess, prior to Jill and Christine here. That was myself and James put this together, ventilating spaces throughout the district. So at Goose Hill, this was the old main office. It's now office space and small group instruction. This is another office conference room area, which is the new main entrance, and then different spaces in the admin wing, and then the Board of Ed room. Here, what we're recommending is work location 2 and 3, which are these 2 work locations, just to keep us under budget. I will revisit this one and break this up by area in terms of that. So right now, the total package we're recommending is $325,000. We had an overall budget of $652,000, so we have $326,000 back into the 21-22 capital line item that we can use to do the other ventilation projects with.
Can I ask a question? I know a few community members have gotten up and asked, why do we piggyback off of other bids? Why are we not doing our own bidding? Like with the Southampton bid, right?
We did.
We did do our own bidding.
We did,
So this is
so,
all our own bids, and when they came in too high, because the budget, we would have had to not do the work, we searched for other avenues, which you're allowed to piggyback by law off of other contracts. So we just take the work, we spell it out, we price it off of the contracts that already have the prices laid out. So if you go back to the PAC, for instance, go back to the PAC, John?
Yes.
Particularly the PAC, if you actually see down below, original bids to be rejected, the bids we wrote and opened on January 9th, came to 1.2, what'd you say?
1 point.
Oh, January 8th, came up to $1.2 million. We wouldn't have been able to proceed with the PAC work because we only had $800,000 in the budget to do that work. So went back to the drawing board, John did, found bids that had audio-visual work and all the stuff we want to do, Southampton and others, and you're allowed to do that. And those same prices on those other bids that were open at other times come in at $809,000. So the only way we can proceed with the work is to use a piggyback contract. And probably 95% of all the purchases we make in the district are piggyback I would say 99% of all the purchases we make in the district are piggyback contract in general.
but we do our bidding first. and
No,
then-
we
Not
don't bid
always.
most things.
Not always.
So 95% of the stuff, 95% of the stuff we do not bid. The only thing we write bids for is our capital project work. The rest of the purchases in the district are done through all different cooperative and piggyback contracts. We use state contracts, county contracts, BOCES contracts. We go to individual school district contracts. That's where we buy all supplies. We participate in ed data. We participate in we in cooperatives like Sourcewell. So almost all of the things that we buy, like Mr. Monastero's here, there's not anything that he buys that isn't off a piggyback contract. There's nothing that Mr. Clements buys that isn't off a piggyback contract in the whole district. Because we don't have a purchasing staff of people, of 10 people, who go out and say, I need to buy 25 of these folders. They go and buy it off a piggyback contract. Someone else has already done that work. So that's really how it really works. So in capital work, we go out to bid, because you never know what you're gonna get, but then the bids come in too high, and there's many other sources that you could look to legally, state contract, county, BOCES, and see if you can get that work done.
So
in this
in
one
this
particular
case, it's about $360,000
Yeah, that we
difference.
saved by going to piggy bank back. We wouldn't have been able to do the pack at all. We would have had to table it and just not do the work at all. We'll just never do it.
So getting back to the 21-22, again, we're recommending right now work location 2 and 3. So we have a $326,000 surplus in the 21-22.
Yeah, John, just go one more time on
Sure.
Goose Hill. What's not getting done at Goose Hill?
Right now, I'm holding off to the side, the central administration wing. I want to
And
make
what,
sure.
what were the projects you identified in that? It's
Air con-
ventilation?
Ventilation, the community room, as well as a number of the offices. But now, technically, all of these exterior offices for adults, they have windows. They 100% meet code. New construction, even if it just has a window, the state education department requires mechanical fresh air ventilation. And their thought process is an administrator that doesn't have students in there, if they want to open the window or close the window, that's their prerogative. In a student-occupied space, they must have mechanical fresh air ventilation for what we talked about before, wind-driven rain, very cold, that kind of thing. So I'm holding off this area for now until we go through the rest of the project. I can break this up further so we can get as close to the budget number as possible without going over.
So, I mean, that looks like you're only doing maybe a quarter or a third of the original work proposed in this area?
So we have another $300,000 to play with. We're going to go back and redesign this area and go out to rebid and try to
Right.
bring this number in more competitively. It happens a lot in construction where we go out to bid, bids come in over, we have to go back, value engineer, re-engineer it, repackage it, that kind of thing.
I mean, it looks like a quarter of the work is taking up half the budget.
Right. I
Well,
agree.
this is a majority of the space here. So most of the space is in here, and it's also involving a lot of ceiling replacement, a lot of lighting replacement, because we're using ductwork. So in order to get the ductwork in and the ceiling mounted units in, we're doing a lot of demo.
Right, but I'm saying the two areas that you are doing, areas 2 and 3, are using up half of the proposed budget.
Correct.
Correct, because it was over
So it's a
budget.
lot more expensive than.
Right, I mean,
Those are
again,
occupied spaces.
Okay.
my suggestion would be you focus on the student-occupied spaces, while there is some antiquated spaces in the district office. As Mr. Grillo said, we can open windows and do all of those things and regulate our own temperatures in those spaces, as opposed to you have 25 kids in there, or now a little bit smaller, but 20 kids.
I think your question is more, is it fair to say we're coming under budget when we're doing such a significantly smaller piece of the work?
Or
Is
that
that
was my
what?
that was my observation. You know,
Yeah.
to say that we're, I mean, it's just,
Well, we haven't
that's all.
finished
It's just,
the work.
it's super expensive.
It's hard to evaluate because you're taking a budget that has 4 things and then
Right.
comparing it to a bid that we say has 3 things, so we have no idea the comparative.
Right.
In 2 slides, I'll kind of bring that all home a little bit.
Okay.
So at West Side, there was only the request to do these couple of areas, a teacher's lounge and a little kitchenette area. That one we were actually well under budget on. The bid came in at $97,000. The budget was $224,000, so we have another $126,000 under budget there. Lloyd Harbor was the only one that actually came in over budget here. So this used to be the main office. Now I think it's the nurse's office. I think it's a psychologist's office, And then these are the 4 rooms in the front of the building that we talked about, to proper ventilation in all of those spaces. Right now, when we built the new security area, we moved the main office to across the hall there several years ago. That number, the total bids came in at 343,000. We had a budget of 258, so we're 84,000. Now, just so we remember, we're recommending right now 366,000. As long as you don't go 1 penny over your total, I'm sorry, 766,000. As long as we don't go 1 penny over the total, you can move funds from building to building. So right now, we have $368,000 to work with to review those bids, value engineer, and put it back out to bid to address a couple of rooms that we were over budget on.
Right, so that would be bathrooms and ventilation.
This will just be used for the 21-22 capital stuff, the ventilation piece.
Okay,
These
just
were the funds
ventilation.
that aren't part of bond 2019, just so the board is aware. And when the public voted on the budget in 21-22, so when they went the prior May to the voting, there was a line item called transfer to capital for $1,134,000 to do this work. And it's not part of bond 2019. So just so you're aware, this is its standalone, its own budget for $1,134,000.
Christine, if that money is not spent, what happens to it?
Well, the money will be spent because the money will definitely be
Okay,
spent.
but what happens if they decide not to spend it on any of these projects?
Well, we will rebid the bathrooms, and we won't be able to do the 19 bathrooms at Lloyd Harbor or all of the bathroom work because there will not be enough money with 368,000. We will have to make a decision as to how we parse out the remaining $368,000.
This one is locked in because the community voted on HVAC specifically.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry.
We can only use
Right.
this money for HVAC. If
I'm
we
sorry, I
decide
said
not to
wrong.
do the work, I think it goes right back into general fund.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, this was for just ventilation improvements. This was an offset of the COVID,
Right.
of what happened with COVID. So this is just improved ventilation. So at the end, if we have money left over and we finished all projects, we file all reports with the state of New York, that money is a refund to the general fund because we did not spend the money.
That was my question.
But, and
Oh,
John, you're saying this budget stands alone? It has nothing to do with the 2019 bond?
That's correct.
Correct. As we were doing the bond referendum in 2019, the district put forth to the community for additional HVAC, separate and distinct from the 2019 bond, individual transfer to capital projects.
Not to harp on ventilation, but we talked about ventilation on the other slide as an increased cost, and now ventilation is in this also. Are they separate ventilation projects?
Separate spaces.
Yes, these were identified in 2019. Then when we just we did our walkthrough for our building condition survey in 2023, which was just done this fall. We identified whatever it was, 7 or 8 more rooms that are now being used with students and staff that don't have proper mechanical ventilation, that we have to do more ventilation to.
Okay. Okay.
So what's the total cost of just doing that ventilation work now that we are identifying new classrooms that need ventilation?
They're two separate budgets.
So this guy is what we would,
Separate.
from 21-22.
Right.
The stuff that we're recommending in Christine's first
To be
slide
included in
is
that.
separate. We don't have money for that yet. The community needs
Right.
to vote on
So
it.
how much more was that? Could you remind me, like,
It was 600 and change just for the improved ventilations across all schools.
For
600 and,
that's just for the new classrooms identified, the 600?
Correct.
yes.
Okay. and
Spaces identified that weren't part of this in 21-22.
that weren't part of this, and the spaces that identified here, it costs 766.
The bids that were, right, the bids that we're asking the board to approve that we opened on
Okay.
January 9th.
8th.
8th, came to 766,000.
So after all of those projects are bid, these are the projects that are left in the 2019 bond. And anything with an asterisk has already been submitted to the State Education Department, reviewed, and has been approved, and we have building permits for that. There's a couple of smaller projects that don't have SED approval yet because we were holding off to get some of the priority projects done. So what's next to do,
Wait, hold on a minute,
Sure.
just before you move on. So these are some of the items that were recommended, were projects within Bond 2019.
correct,
The funding source for these items isn't, we don't have that yet, correct, Christine?
The funding source for this is Bond
Well,
2019.
I mean, but we don't know, I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong term. We don't know the amount.
Yeah, so once we award and reject the bids for tonight, and we proceed with Phase 3, the bond was built in 4 phases. We're in Phase 3 projects. So Phase 4 projects and anything that fell out of Phase 3 and moved here, like the toilet reconstructions, the bathroom
bathrooms,
renovations,
right.
are on this list. Those, we'll call them all now Phase 4 for just this conversation. And this is the phase where you're deciding how much money's left. You're opening bids in little pieces so that you know how much money you have left. These
Yes.
are now, we're gonna term these all Phase 4. Kate, the toilet reconstructions on there are technically Phase 3, but we're not awarding them later in the meeting, so we're moving them to Phase 4. So basically, there'll be a pot of money left that we will identify that amount of money, and potentially even some old sources of money that might be available. So for instance, from 17 and 18, I might be able to find $200,000 in money that was unspent for bathrooms many years ago. Okay? There's not a lot. I don't want to get everybody, excited. There's only little pockets of a couple of $100,000 here and there that we might be able to group together with Bond 2019. And then we have to prioritize these projects. So if toilet renovations, let's just say that was the number 1 priority. We would go out to bid just for the toilet renovations, and we'd come back to you yet again and say, well, no, now this is what's available. Because let's say they come in at a certain number, but we've prioritized them. We want to do those renovations there for students and those bathrooms. Then we have this amount of money left. Okay, so we remove bathrooms from here, and you look again and you say, what's the next thing we want to go out to bid? And we go out to bid for the next item. Because at the very end of the project, you have to be very careful, because you only have an authority to spend up to what Bond 2019 allowed you to do, and you have to be very careful of that. So at the end, we're doing a lot more little bids than the wide amount of bids. You're now approving or rejecting bids from Phase 3, and you're seeing all these bids you'll see it in the agenda that you're going to be approving and rejecting. You're going to see it much differently in Phase 4. We're going to have to make each of those decisions. And if a bid comes in too high, we may have to then, the board rejects it, maybe you do a different project because it came in too high. You can't do, I'll pick something on here. You can't do, I want to take something not too controversial. Like the scoreboard. The scoreboard comes in really high. Do we do the scoreboard, or do we go back and do
7 more bathrooms or something.
whatever, additional parking at one of the schools? Yeah, that's really where we're going to be at the very end, because it's not unusual at the end of a project to not be able to do everything in Phase 4. That's why they're put in phases.
And the ones with asterisks, what,
they've already been approved by the State Education Department. So we've already submitted those, and they've been approved as part of the larger project. So if we wanted to go out to bid with anything with an asterisk, we don't have to go back up to the state.
They're not on, the asterisks are not on our
Yeah.
paper that
No?
we have.
No.
No.
Maybe they copied it before that.
Oh. Okay, so anything, I'll make sure you get this slide, but anything with the asterisk, like I said, has already been approved by the state. So if we wanted to go out to bid tomorrow or rebid on bathrooms or the music room renovation, we could do that right away without having to go back to the state. There's a couple of these projects at the high school, some site work, some additional parking. If we wanted to move forward with that as a priority, those would have to go back to the State Education Department for a building permit.
And John, just tell everybody what the wait time is for state approval on plans.
Right now, it's 26 weeks.
Right, so once he draws them, it takes 26 weeks to hear back.
I know there were some discussions by the board about site work at the junior, senior high school. That would be the storefront, a lot of the paving work here in the front, the concrete. We've done repairs and things on that, but there's been some discussions about making improvements at least to the front of the junior, senior high school, and that was some of the site work. The curbs around the circle.
Yeah, so what John and I discussed was, after tonight's meeting, which you're really approving or rejecting bids for Phase 3 and to move forward with all those projects, then we would have a subsequent meeting related to Phase 4. We would finalize numbers a little more, We'd find some pockets of money that might have been from older sources that might allowed for bathroom work. And if it allowed for bathroom work in 2017-18, and we haven't finished that bathroom work or filed all the final paperwork with the state, we can still do some of the bathrooms. Okay, bathrooms are bathrooms if it was approved. So we're going to meet, John and I. Then we thought we'd come back to the table with the board, and that's when we have to start granularly getting into this list. What do you want us to go out to bid now?
Right.
And that will be our next phase after tonight's award or rejection of bids. Yeah, here we
What
are.
Christine said.
Okay, is there any additional questions on bond 2019 or for Mr. Grillo while he's still here? Okay, thank you very much.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Christine, you're comfortable if anything comes up on the agenda to answer the board's questions on the bids? Okay. Okay, the next presentation, I'm going to ask Ms. Lagatuda to come up and share this presentation the board had asked for as part of their goals this year, to look at some of the comparative data regarding our New York State exams. That includes Regents results and 3 through 8 assessments. And pretty much the focus of the presentation, we took a look at our comparative schools related to those schools who made the U.S. News and World Report's top performing schools list. And so we use those schools as a benchmark for something to look at within this data.
Good evening. Sorry, I may repeat what you just said. So some of what you're going to see tonight may look a little bit like a repeat because there's some data, obviously, that we discussed in October that you're going to see again. The purpose of tonight is to see how our scores compare to other school districts' data. At this time, we have available the New York State assessment data. We have the Regents data. The AP data has not yet been released, although we've been trying to gather our own by speaking with people in other school districts. So I do have a couple of disclaimers before we start. So one, you're going to notice in one of the slides some boxes that are highlighted in orange. Those represent the highest participation rates by school districts, ours being one of them. So stay tuned for that. Other thing you will notice, as was displayed in one of the Newsday articles, is for our New York State assessment data, Cold Spring Harbor placed 4th for math on Long Island and 6th for ELA in the comparison that we're going to go through. Now, although those are very high standings across Long Island, we do have the highest participation rate when we compare ourselves to those schools who have higher proficiency rates. Not that we're the highest out of everyone, but with the schools that have the higher proficiency rate, we do have the highest participation rate. It is helpful to look at comparative data, but there are pros and cons, and this is my disclaimer. So I want everyone to understand that, one, we don't have the same participation rates as other schools, so therefore it's hard to understand which students opted into the test and which students opted out. So again, we have different populations of students taking those tests. So I just want everyone to keep that in mind. It's not necessarily an apples to apples comparison. However, it's good to look at the data because if we see that one of our grade levels, for example, seems to be declining, you know, we want to take a look at, do we think that's an issue with the exam? Is it an issue with the cohort of students? You know, for example, we're going to talk about 3rd grade, which during COVID, those were our kindergarten students, right? And we're going to see that 3rd grade across the board, they were struggling. So that's something to keep in mind as well as we look at the data. So just be mindful that the data could be skewed, but it's still important to look to see if trends are aligned. So we'll take a look at first, this is the Newsday data. This comes right from Newsday. We'll take a look at grades 3 through 8 for the ELA, and those are the orange boxes that we talked about. So you'll see here for ELA, we placed 6th on Long Island, and the box in orange shows that with the districts who had a higher proficiency rate, which you'll see above us, we do have the highest participation rate for our students. You'll see below with the other districts that are listed, and not all of them are listed, but with the districts below, you can see that a few other school districts had relatively high participation rates. For math, again, this is just an overview from Newsday, grades 3 through 8 mathematics. We did place 4th overall on Long Island. And again, for the districts who had higher proficiency rates, we did have the highest participation rate. And again, you can see a few schools below.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just taking a look at Cold Spring Harbor and East Williston in the mathematics slide, so we have similar number of students who should have been tested, and yet you're taking out almost 70 kids, or 60-something kids, out of East Williston who did not test. That's a significant number of kids in the data to have removed. Now, there might be a number of reasons why.
200.
I'm
No,
sorry.
and the
No,
difference
no,
between the
difference between
two.
tested and not
Yep.
Between
tested.
us and them, the difference is
Oh,
about
the
70.
difference between us and them.
Don't worry, Christine, we'll explain the math to you. Jill and I have got you.
We're looking at a lot of numbers tonight, so.
They also have 30 more students too. So you have
Right,
to look
yeah.
at the percentage.
Yeah, so there's
more.
30 more kids, but about 60, right. So there's about 30, right?
It's like 4%
35,
difference.
right? But when we look at students who are typically not tested, it oftentimes is your struggling learners, because there is a lot of data on struggling learners. They take a lot of local assessments, or within their special education classes, they're being assessed regularly. A lot of times educators feel like, why put this child through this exam again? I already know the information on this child, or parents for that matter. So I don't know who was tested or not tested, but I can tell you that is a philosophy of many people to say, don't put children through that again. It's a long exam for some kids, and just the stamina alone for kids to sit through exam. So if you're taking out your 30 students who might not perform very well on the exam, that's a significant change in results. Now, I'm just giving that one example, but it's frustrating to look at data when it's not apples to apples. And look, our goal is to focus on Cold Spring Harbor, and we encourage families to participate in this exam. Again, we want to be sensitive to students' needs and their ability to sit for an exam, but we feel that this information can be used not only for the child, but for district-wide. How are we doing on a particular grade level? Are there gaps in instruction? Are there specific questions that we're not targeting, or I should say skills within that? So again, I don't want to make excuses for the data, but it is not apples to apples in some of these districts.
And you can see the numbers are close. If you look to the right of the screen, or on the presentation that you have in front of you, the proficiency rates are there. So for example, Cold Spring Harbor, we had an 89% proficiency rate, and the numbers are very close when you look at the districts who had a higher proficiency rate.
You take Plainfield Bethpage, 1,000 out of their 2,500 students, kids didn't test. They're only at a 55% participation rate, but their performance is just, a few slots behind us. That's significant. Again, Jen and I worked in that district, and there was a lot of opt-out movement back in the day, and obviously it's still in place.
Syosset had over 1,000 kids, right? Who didn't test.
Yes.
Granted,
I mean, that's
they're
huge.
right. Mm-hmm. They're certainly much larger than us,
Larger.
but we look at a Jericho, which is double our enrollment, or eligible to be tested, right? They're at a 77% participation rate compared to our 81% participation rate.
Is that how they break the tie? Like Jericho and Syosset both had 90.3 proficiency, but Jericho had more percent tested,
We
or
just
is?
put them on the list, that, yeah,
Probably.
that one.
Probably.
But I mean, look, I'm just saying you can look at the data a number of different ways. And where you want to focus on where we need to make improvements, where we're doing well, and celebrate those successes. Again, it's about Cold Spring Harbor kids. But, and we have some work to do. So let's talk about the, Jen, in the ELA grade 3.
Well, yeah, we're
Grade
just,
3, yeah, keep going.
th-
Next
this
slide
was
is
just,
3.8.
yeah, this was overall. We can skip to, so we'll come back to the New York State assessments in a moment. We have our Regents exam data as well, broken down by course. You'll see the Cold Spring Harbor colored in red, and again, the list of the schools are in order based on the highest proficiency down to the lowest proficiency in this particular subgroup that we're talking about. So you will see that we have a lot to celebrate here with respect to Regents exams, ELA. For example, we're at the top at 100%. So some of our areas of strength in terms of this particular comparison: Algebra 1, living environment, chemistry, and some other areas that, again, taking a deeper look, as we talked about, geometry, for example, we're at the lower end of this subgroup. Algebra 2, and those are two, as we know, very challenging math courses. We have earth science towards the bottom with this particular group. Physics, which we've known, we've been looking at that data in physics. And we're in the middle for US. And global a little bit towards the top. But overall, these are strong numbers for our school on the Regents exams.
And Jen, do you know how many of these schools do the hold harmless?
I know you talked about that. We're going to include that information when the presentation comes forward about the Regents exam weighting. We'll include that.
But so you don't know offhand
I
who
don't know.
does it
Yeah,
and
so-
doesn't do it? No one knows? I mean,
Yep, so Syosset is a no hold harmless, is a hold harmless district.
okay.
Jericho is not. Dan, you can help me out here. North Shore is not.
Yes,
Manhasset isn't. Go ahead.
Syosset is peeling back from that. My understanding in speaking with the principal there is that they were hold harmless during the COVID pandemic and the years following, but they are no longer hold harmless. Jericho is hold harmless unless you, unless it benefits your, unless the grade benefits your overall course average. They counted at 20%. Out of the survey that I sent out, which is all part of the presentation for the February board meeting, there were 3 schools, I think, that were participating in hold harmless. Belmar Merrick, which is a long-established hold harmless practice.
We're just looking at of these schools here.
Of these schools
So it's
here,
Jericho.
Jericho is hold harmless. Syosset is not. They said they count their final exams.
Right, but did they count it in this? I know they're not going
But for
forward.
these-
No, for this
For
data,
these
it was hold
scores.
harmless. For this
Okay.
data, it was
Yes.
hold harmless.
Okay.
For last school year, it was hold
Right,
harmless.
so I just want to be clear, because what we're taking data on going forward, but Jericho and Syosset both, right? And the other ones,
I believe Manhasset had a hold harmless. I don't know if they did full hold harmless or if they did similar to what we did,
Abbreviated.
which was having 2 weightings and whichever one benefited the student more. But I know as of right now, moving forward, they're at 18% of their final course grade as a Regents exam.
Is that Jericho, you said?
That was Manhasset.
Oh, Manhasset.
So you think it's possible for these scores that Manhasset had hold harmless in place?
For this score, I believe they did, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
right, so for the public, on the 13th, Mr. Dan Buskey has been working with the school improvement team, and we'll be looking at the Regents weighting, and then the hold harmless conversation. Okay, Jen, keep going.
All right, so returning back to the New York State assessments, these are the historical trends for ELA. You'll notice Cold Spring Harbor, wherever you see the yellow boxes, that's where we sit within the ranking order for this particular subgroup. So we did talk about in October the concerns that we have for grade 3. So if you follow vertically, we'll start with grade 3 on the left-hand side. You'll see 18-19. We did skip, obviously, 19-20. That was the year of COVID. And then for 2021, if you recall, there was an assessment, but it was only the multiple choice questions. So that data really should not be used in the comparison. So we're using 18-19, 21-22, and 22-23. So as you look vertically, left-hand column at third grade, you can see that there has been a decline when you look back at 18-19 to where we are in 22-23. So that's a grade that we've been keeping our eye on. You will notice in this particular grouping that there was a decline in all of these other schools as well, except for Great Neck. So again, they were seeing a similar decline. These were our kindergarten students back in COVID, and it's been challenging. But although the other districts declined as well, most of them, we're still towards the bottom in terms of our proficiency rate for grade 3.
Right, so if I just want to point out, in 18-19 to 22-23, this grouping is the most concerning in comparative to the other districts. While other districts might have dropped 5% in that time period, we're dropping almost 15% in that grouping. So our conversations are really not a third grade conversation, they're a K-3 conversation. So it's not just going to change in that 1 year. We really need to look at the rigor of our coursework, particularly in grade 2, where students are making the transition from the primary grades coming into the elementary school. Oftentimes we look at a second grade curriculum and it tends to be like it's a transition year and it tends to be a little bit easier, and yet I'm concerned that we know our kids are coming from very enriched households. There's a lot of language built in those primary years. I mean, you talk to some of our kindergarten first graders, like they're ahead of the pack. And so we really need to close this gap, and we should have the ability to do this. And that's really, in particular, looking at that second grade curriculum, even our first grade curriculum. You know, our kids are coming in with many years of a preschool education, thanks to Mrs. Smith. But again, we should be doing better in this grade level. And while districts report the third grade exam being one of the most difficult exams, there was a lot of cultural education in the questions. Jen had shared them in the fall, some of the questions on the third grade exam. Everybody else took the third grade exam in other school districts, so we can't make that excuse, oh, that this exam was different from our school district as compared to somebody else's. So this I'm very concerned about, and we really need to drill down particularly to the language skills of our kids coming out. We should be doing better here.
What month did they take this test?
This exam was in April, and then the math was in May.
Math is in
So
May.
it's the majority of the
School
school
year,
year, yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
And
So Jill, just.
have you, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Tammy.
No, I'm just curious, have you broken this down between West Side and Lloyd Harbor?
With the comparison, no,
No, just our 83%. I forget if we did that
Yes.
in
Yes,
October.
we did it.
We did. And was there a significant issue with one school or no?
So
Yes.
I jotted that down just in case it came up as a question. We
Thanks.
have West Side had a 75% proficiency rate, and Lloyd Harbor had a 63% for grade 3.
And also Lloyd Harbor had a greater opt-out as compared to West Side.
Okay, so you would assume they would do better. Right.
And the other presentation is still on our website. That was the one from October. There is a breakdown, just to remind everyone, of each of the schools. If we take a look at grade 4, so our position with respect to these schools has remained about the same. You will notice for 4th grade that almost every school district went up in terms of percentage, except for one of the schools. So Jericho wound up going down for this particular grade level, but all of the other schools went up for ELA 4th grade. 5th grade, and just in terms of, and I don't have all of them, Tammy, but for this particular grade, I have West Side at 72% and Lloyd Harbor at 87%. For grade 5 ELA, okay, so you can see that we've been improving. In fact, if you look at this as a whole, Cold Spring Harbor's data has improved. So if you're looking vertically, has improved in some cases more than others, except for 3rd grade that we were talking about before.
Yeah, if you're going from 18-19 in grade 5 ELA, we're at 58%, and now we're at 81%. Keep in mind, other districts were at 70%, they're at 83%, but we grew substantially in ELA in grade 5.
And that's something to celebrate. So although we're still, below the mid-range there, we still celebrate the growth that we have made as a district. Okay, and you could see for grade 5 as well. Grade 5 was a tremendous increase. So we had 79% in 18-19 and then 91%.
You're talking about grade 6.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
grade
Yep.
6. Was looking without my glasses, I apologize. Grade 6. Alex?
Oh, thanks. I have double glasses on, if it makes you feel better, Contacts, glasses. I was going to say, the question is, in the 6th grade is really remarkable, particularly looking back at like the 5th grade from a few years ago, which is really wonderful. The drop off, though, between 6th and 7th seems interesting, right? What do you attribute that to?
Well, one of it is a transition. So,
Yeah.
and in a later slide, we're going to talk about what are some steps that we're putting in place to hopefully address some of these gaps. So one is a transition. I know that Caitlin spearheaded bringing 6th and 7th grade teachers together. Mr. Taylor was there, Ms. Geiser was there, I was there, to really have conversations about when they're getting into 7th grade, the 6th grade teachers are interested in knowing what do they feel the students are lacking, when they get to that junior high level. And, one thing that came up repeatedly was common language, and expectation levels. So, there was some talk about, is there too much enabling going on at the 6th grade level? So there were great conversations. We are going to continue with that. Also, in terms of technology, introducing Canvas a little bit earlier in 6th grade, just so that the students don't have as much of a transition there with technology. So those are steps that we have in place. But I would say the transition, and also looking at our program, right, our curriculum. And
I would say one of the areas where we tend to fall off from 6th grade to 7th is the volume of reading.
I was going to ask if you think they're reading enough in 7th grade.
No, so I know our 6th graders, they're constantly reading. They read probably at least 15 books a year in the 6th grade, and they're not doing that same level of reading in the junior high. And again, that's typical of a junior high student. I mean, when you walk past an elementary classroom, a kid in their free time has a book open on their desk, right? That's just the setting is very different than moving from class to class. They, have more time. There's more assignments in the elementary level where kids are reading at night. There's drop everything and read. So there is, it's just a different setting. But I would say by 6th grade, there's a lot of emphasis on writing and reading in the grade 6. In the elementary school. And I'm not saying that it's not there in 7th grade, it's just a different environment, and kids have different interests, and they're not spending as much time picking up a book at the junior high level.
I would also say that the time, the structure of the days are different. So, we have an 80-minute block, for example, in 6th grade. It's reading and writing, it's a literacy block, so there's a little bit more leeway for students to have independent reading time at the elementary level as compared to when you get to the junior, senior high school. However, we do have the writing workshop in place. I know we're talking about reading. I just want to point out that we do have an extra period every other day for our students for writing in 7th and 8th grade, which is not every school can say that they have that. But again, something we have to look at to see if we can just get more leverage.
Right, so
with
where's
those
the balance?
classes.
I mean, so you're giving them more writing opportunities, which is needed for the upper grades, yet, they don't have the same reading block in junior high.
And we've been working with a consultant and spending a lot of time talking about writing about their reading, right? So we're encouraging students to read, but they can write about their reading, and that helps us to gain more evidence about their reading comprehension. I also want to point out just sixth grade, you know, as impressive as that jump is, I just want to note that all of the other districts in this particular group declined. They were on a decline, whereas not only did we have an increase, but it was a significant increase. So that speaks to the instruction taking place there, of course.
Yeah, and I also just want to note, I mean, I'm looking at over time, but, you know, 69% in 18-19 in grade 7, and we are at 81%. So, you know, we're moving in the right direction. And I think, you know, some of those being very strategic about the literacy work and that kind of thing. We also asked the teachers to put in classroom libraries in the junior high, and because kids aren't coming to the library to sign out a book as they would. And so their books are in the elementary classroom in the back of the room. There are book bins everywhere. That's not typically the setting here. So we're asking just to try to introduce that a little bit more into the typical classroom. And I'm not saying that every kid's going to take the book from that room, but they might be encouraged by the teacher saying, oh, you love science fiction, or you like, you know, you're going to love this. Here's a sports book. Take this, as opposed to them walking down and saying, go take this out of the library.
That's great.
You'll notice too, even for eighth grade, although we're not towards the top in this group, again, there's been slight improvement, but improvement happening in eighth grade as well.
I think it's important to really take a look at the data this way, because you really want to see if everybody improved on the exam by 5%, are we keeping pace with other districts? Are we exceeding that, or are we falling short?
We're going to move to math if that's okay with everybody. Okay, good. All right, so in terms of the math, again, looking at third grade, you'll see that if you look at it vertically down the way, started out at 91% in 18-19 and 22-23, 83%. So there has been a decline, but you will notice that 83, although it's a decline from that 91%, it was an improvement from the prior year. So in 21-22, it was 76%, and there was an increase there for third grade. You'll notice, again, if we look at this as a whole, we were up, basically, as you look at each grade level. We have increases across all of these grade levels, and so do the districts, the other districts that we are comparing ourselves with, they increased as well. Fourth grade, you can see that we were towards the bottom in 18-19, and we're middle, slightly higher than the middle for 22-23. Grade 5, we can take a look at, we're about in the same placement. We went up a little bit, in 21-22, and then dropped down a little bit. And I also want to add, as we're looking at this data, we are also, and I will talk about this in a later slide more so, we also utilize the Universal Screener of STAR, which, and it's not the only assessment that we use, but it's one of the tools that we utilize. It also can help by giving us predictions of using their analytics where they think our kids will fall. So it does have some powerful results that help us to figure out the specific skills that STAR is picking up on that our students need additional support on. So we have those meetings throughout the year with the teachers.
But I think also, if you're just looking, if you can flip your page, like looking at the cohort, right? So these are different kids that we're comparing in 18-19 than we're comparing in 22-23. So if our third graders are not performing exceptionally well in math, how are they doing in ELA, right? So they're struggling in both. I don't want to say struggling in both, but we need to make improvements in both of those areas. So that it might be the cohort, whereas you're looking at the sixth grade cohort in both ELA and math, and they're both exceptionally strong, right? So it could be the cohort of students taking the exam. It could be just the environment thing. It could be the exam that year.
If you look back diagonally, though, right, they're like
grade 5.
sixth grade to grade 5 to grade 4. They significantly improved.
Yep, grade 5 to grade 6,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, they went from 79% the year before in
Yeah.
grade 5. They're making the gains in grade 6
Yeah.
to 91%. And again, those kind of cohort data is on those previous slides from the fall. But important to look at the growth from year to year and the cohort. But again, if we're concerned about grade 3 and even that cohort, then we have to really target the instruction, whether it be in ELA or mathematics.
This is the grade 2 that we lowered the class size
Oh, we lowered the class size, yeah.
for
and
this
then-
year, though.
For this
So-
year, so,
and
right, so it'll be
yeah.
interesting to see how they do this spring. Good point.
Jen, have we looked at comparative data for AP courses as well? Are we following that?
So that data is not available yet. As soon as it is, I'll make that data available to all
So
of you.
Mr.
So I've been
Jambuski
checking-
has already been collecting that data. I think he has 4 of the 6 districts that we tried to pull off their presentations off their websites. Some of them actually don't even put up on their website. I don't know why. We've called there. They will not share it. They share it internally, but they don't want to share it publicly. But again, eventually that data will become available. It's just that we can't get it off their website. But I'll ask Mr. Jambuski to put a little bit of that data together for the 13th.
Great, thank you.
Now, this slide we could have really done in the beginning, or we're circling back. What do we value in student learning? Because what we value here in Cold Spring Harbor might be different than what other school districts are valuing. So I just want to keep that in mind as well, as we think about our data. So, at the very top, we've spoken about this many times before, that we value exposure to rigorous curriculum, right? So we have open enrollment. Some school districts have what they call open enrollment, but they have a different version of open enrollment. Maybe it's not applying to all courses. Some have where the students can try it out for a period of time and see how they're doing. We believe in open enrollment or self-selection, giving students the opportunity to be exposed to rigorous curriculum. And if they're not doing as well, it's still their choice. So let's say they were a 90 student and they're challenging themselves with a more more rigorous curriculum, and their grade might be in the 70s, but they may appreciate having that exposure to the curriculum. I don't know if it's still on.
Okay, I mean, we could see, obviously all of these areas, academic achievement is important to us. Multiple varied opportunities, as Ms. Lagatude, interdisciplinary experiences, growth mindset. The elementary schools in particular spend a lot of time on growth mindset from a very early age. So again, this is important, and Jen?
I just want to point, just going back to multiple varied opportunities, for a small school district, we have such a high number of course offerings in our junior, senior high school. It's something to be extremely proud of that we do for our students. And another thing that we try to be creative problem solvers in terms of, okay, this class may not run, can we co-seat it with another class? That happens oftentimes in art, where we're still giving those opportunities to students when there are similarities within the courses. So again, it's something to celebrate that we do here. We even run some courses that other districts larger than us, they're not getting the enrollment and not able to run. So
Well, I mean, look at our physics numbers. Well, the Regents exam results aren't the strongest, but you take a look at all the APs and all the different levels of physics that we offer. We're a really tiny district, and yet other districts don't offer those many opportunities. I do want to give a shout out to the high school administration, because oftentimes, like if we're only getting 4 kids for a course, we'll start calling kids and say, what about this course, so that a course can run, or that maybe it was option 2, or they, so we really make an effort to give kids what they need and want.
We talked about this actually the other night, but it was not at a recorded meeting, so I feel like it's important to say that the amount of amazing classes the kids are offered here, and the like really, it's so inspiring to my children to hear my kids talk in the car. I'm so grateful to everyone in this room. To talk to their friends, to hear them having conversations about what they're so excited to take next year. I mean, it's January. It's the longest January on record. It's January, but they're so excited, and they're thrilled, and parents are excited about everything that's going on with the new science wing and robotics and but just all of the like business level college classes they can take. You know, my 8th grader excited that maybe he could wear his brother's suit to do a presentation in virtual enterprise someday, just like his brother. That's amazing. They get up excited to come here, so thank you all. The other thing that I feel like is a real thing to talk about that you and I talk about is looking at just how close, when we look at the percentages with the schools who maybe outrank us, but how close we are. And we always talk about that it's like just a fraction of a hair. So it's not that we're not doing a great job, but when, you know, Jill says, and you say, like, let's look at these little areas where we can really boost things up to help with the fraction of the hair. That's exactly what I think people don't understand, is that when we're ranked 6th, we're so close to 4, 5, all of the, you know, we're close. I should be able to count
From
backwards, but I
apples to
can't,
apples, right?
apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other
It's the
thing
easy
is,
math,
I
right,
want to
Kate?
acknowledge just our conversation. We had Ms. Hecht and I had a conversation with Dr. Schimpf today, really looking at possibilities of a co-teach class. What would that mean staffing-wise? How do we really help our struggling learners get the best opportunity, like for the most exposure to the curriculum, but with the support needed? And yet, we talked about the primary classes of, like, are special education kids also getting reading? Are they also getting math? What are those tier 1 supports that are in place? So those are conversations that we need to continue having, and making sure, particularly our earliest learners, have the most opportunities to really acquire their reading and math skills in K and 1 before they, you know, move to the elementary schools. But
I just want to add, and you could look at this more in depth. I did add this slide after it was posted on Friday. I felt like we couldn't help ourselves here. This information is posted on our district website under accolades. We have that. So I just put it together just to remind us of, yes, we certainly have work to do, and we're going to talk about how we're going to address gaps, but there's so much to celebrate. So if we could just talk for a moment, the U.S. News and World Report, just to review for everyone, Cold Spring Harbor High School ranked number 1 in Suffolk County and number 6 amongst all Long Island schools, ranked 268th nationally, and we earned the status of being a U.S. Best High School. And by the way, we have the little logo now, which we can use until June.
I'm confident we're going to keep going.
Yeah, we're going to keep going for sure. But again, that's something to celebrate. And then, as we know, U.S. News and World Report also came out with the best elementary schools. West Side ranking number 34th in New York State out of 3,872 New York elementary schools. That means that they're in the top 1% of the schools. Long Island ranked number 90 out of that number of schools. They're within the top 3%. And both of them made the list to be amongst the top 100 elementary schools in New York State. And again, that's something worth celebrating, our students, our staff. And again, a lot of great information. Our National Merit Scholarship semifinalists, that we had 6. We had 10 students who were designated as commended students in the 69th Annual National Merit Scholarship Program. These are such celebrations. So as much as we keep saying we have work to do, we're going to keep going, as Ms. Girash said, to keep bringing those numbers up. Now, how are we addressing the gaps? I know you've been hearing a lot about literacy PD. So this has been something that big focus. We're hoping that this will have a payoff for our students, and the results will be shown as a result, but it's going to take time. So this is the first year. Our teachers in grades 3 through 6 are working with the literacy coach specifically with regard to this PD. We are focusing on individualized instruction or strategy groups. So the teachers are going from a mini lesson, which is about 10 minutes of the period, to students going into small groups. And the consultants are helping the teachers identify through different types of assessments. It could be a compliment conference, an assessment conference, a goal-setting conference. The idea is getting the students talking. Let's hear more about what the students are talking about in terms of their reading, so we can collect more evidence of the skills that we need to target with them. So that has been a very big focus of this year. Our training is separated by grade level. So for this year, it's grades 3 through 6. 7 and 8 are also being trained. Right now, we have a consultant working with our lab teachers in ELA to, again, help them identify specific needs of our students by utilizing these different types of assessments. K through 2 will be starting in the spring. So there's about a 3-year plan by the time we'll have everyone trained in this type of assessment. For math, and we mentioned this before.
Jen, I'm just going to ask for purposes of time that we just kind of move this along a little bit.
Sure.
I know I always say that to you. Jen always has to go last. She says you always
This is
rush me.
constant. To speed it up. All right, but this one I have to get to, Ms. Girosh. So math benchmarks, not to say that our teachers have never given math benchmarks. So even prior to us coming here, math benchmarks were given. These are standards-based benchmarks, and they cover multiple choice types of questions, short response, extended response, mirroring the types of questions our students would be exposed to on a New York State assessment. We're also trying to move towards small group instruction in the math classes. We're not all there yet, but we're trying to work towards that. So in terms of the math benchmarks, we can report out at a later time. This is our first year with these new benchmarks that I could provide a report at a later time as to how that's going. I talked about the vertical articulation already, first year of our English labs, and everything else you see down below you would be familiar with from previous presentations.
Can I ask a question about the benchmarks? Is that across, like in the elementary school level, across both schools, the same benchmark exam?
Yes, so that was, again, we were trying to foster alignment in both buildings. So I'll refer to it another way as a common assessment. So it's the same assessment for both buildings.
Great.
Other questions? Okay. All right, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank
Jen,
you.
Jen, thank you.
Okay. So now it's time for the audience to visitors, but we don't have visitors, so we will move on to item number 9, which is, sorry, I've lost my script now, but
I just want to recognize Randy Souls is here with us this evening. She is on the agenda as a leave from her teaching assistant position to take on a .8 of the AAS teacher position. So Randy, thank you for spending the night with us for this important
thank you,
conversation.
Randy. So we will take the leave recommendation on page 1. May I have a first? Lisa, second. Kate, questions? All in favor? Thank you. Okay, we will now take the appointment and recommendations on pages 1 to 3 as a slate. May I have a first? Kate, second. Heather, any questions? All in favor? We will now take additional business matters on pages 3 through 10 as a slate. May I have a first? Heather. Second, Bruce. Questions? All in favor? We now move to other matters and the adoption of a policy and statement. Number 8130.2, workplace violence prevention. This is a minor change to this policy that was previously adopted. New York State requires a policy statement to be in effect on February 3rd. We will vote to waive a full reading and first reading of this policy and policy statement and move to adopt. May I have a first? Bill, second. Heather, questions?
So I apologize, I read it, I didn't, I found some like very minor errors in the policy and in the both of these, the policy statement and the actual policy, right? So if, I mean, they're like little minor things, like an extra space here, the missing the word "are" or missing the word "of," like those kinds of very small.
Okay.
So they're not substantive. I don't know if we need to discuss them.
I don't.
Yeah, so I can read a couple of them off. So like,
Okay.
Tammy's acts of workplace violence include but not limited to. She's adding but are not limited to, things like that. There's another one in the sentence, the goal of this policy is to promote the safety, all people in the work, it should say of all people in the workplace, so there's a word left out there. That is in the policy statement, so.
And then that's the same, the beginning of the policy.
Policy,
Right.
and then in terms of the policy, it's like, should say include instead of includes, and is instead of an are, or an are instead of an is in location. So those are some of the edits.
So do we have to have a motion to incorporate those edits, or can we?
Yes.
All right, so may I have a motion to incorporate the edits presented by Tammy Stark? Yes, first Lisa, second Bill. Questions? All in favor? Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you, Tammy.
And now we need to take the motion again, or no, we already had it, we were mid-motion, so we can all in favor.
You're all,
We're
if you
good.
want to do an all in favor one more time, we're
Let's
just like
all in
button and
favor
suspend.
one more time,
Yep.
just to
All in
cross
favor?
that. Thank
Okay.
you. Okay, thank you. We're now up to a second audience to visitors, which we will take a pass on. And now everyone's favorite motion, a motion to adjourn. First, Tammy. Second, Bruce. All in favor. Thank you, everyone, for staying.
Yeah,
Thank you to the administrators for coming tonight. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you
Yeah,
for the great
thank you.
presentations.